excited to be here.
Perfect. And thanks so much for joining us again. We really appreciate it. So let's move on to our second guest panelist, Marquez Thompson, who is a regional outreach representative for Democracy in North Carolina. Marquez, if you want to give us a little introduction about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I appreciate being here today. Again, my name is Marquez Thompson, and the regional manager organizer with Democracy NC. And then that rule, Democracy NC is a nonprofit, a statewide nonprofit that fights for voting rights. And so we do a lot of the behind the scenes work to try to advocate for policies that will make it easier to vote, especially for people who have historically been disenfranchised, black and brown people, women, young people. So we try to make sure that the policies that affect voting are have in mind these historical considerations. And so we do that on the state level. And my role here in Pitt County, what I do is organize local communities to advocate for local policies that help people to vote. So you might see us at the Board of Elections advocating for early voting hours and for site placements. We also organize things like you'll see a voter protection campaign this year. So when people go to vote, we will be there in the yellow shirts to make sure that if for any reason they weren't able to vote or they had some kind of bad experience, we have a hotline that they can call. We have procedures to kind of let people know what their rights are and what things they can do. So we work very hard to make sure that more people vote and that the vote is accessible to more people, and that when people do vote, that vote counts. And so, we do a lot of work along those lines. And so I'm so happy to, I've been working with this organization officially for 4 years. Before that, I was a volunteer for 4. So I've been, so I finally get paid to do what I love to do. So, so no day is work for me since I got hired on. So happy to be here today.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate everything both of you do within our community to kind of educate students and everyone, especially during this time of early voting, which will kind of transition into the first question that I have for the both of you. And just a reminder for all of our attendees, this is an open discussion. So if you guys want to send a message in the chat or raise your hand and join in and ask a question, please feel free to do so. So starting off, the first question that I have for the both of you is, what kind of is the importance of early voting, especially during a pandemic, and what difference does it make in the election process when there is an early voting turnout?
So really quickly, early voting is really important during any time, I would say, especially in North Carolina, because we have what we call one-stop voting, which means that if you are not registered to vote, or let's say you're inactive, or there's any kind of problem with your registration status, when you vote early, when you early vote, they have the opportunity to register you on the spot or to fix whatever's going on. So, so you have time to get it right, with early voting. If you show up on election day and things are not exactly the way they're supposed to be, you've got a problem. Another thing is there's a very flexible. So, right now we've got 7 sites that you can go to. They're all over the county. Whereas on election day, you have to go to your precinct. And so it's, you don't have that flexibility. So those are just 2 big reasons why early voting is, I would say, very important. We have been fighting for early voting for many years, and to make sure that we keep it. Last thing I'll say about it is the flexibility of early voting allows people to vote that ordinarily wouldn't. So, if you are a person who works a 9-to-5 job and you can't leave, and you don't have a lunch break, or there are people that work in a factory, you get a 15-minute break, a 30-minute lunch, and then a 15-minute break. That's it. So you don't have time to leave and come back and vote and come back. So early voting has, we always have that last Saturday that you can vote. So it gives opportunities for people to vote or ordinarily wouldn't have.
Yeah, I will echo some of what Marcus said. A lot of the great things about early voting is what makes it wonderful for a student population. The fact that you can do the same day registration, the fact that if there's a problem with your registration, they can help you correct it. And we work really closely with the Board of Elections to supply information from our campus living folks of who lives on campus, because when you do the same day registration process, they have to have state documentation or some kind of official record of like where you live. And so what's wonderful is the spreadsheet that we provide from campus living to the Board of Elections counts as that state documentation of where you live. And so it makes it super easy for on-campus students to take advantage of that same-day registration opportunity and to vote by really just showing their one card. And then we've also worked with Dave Davis, who's Director of Board of Elections, and the state board, their legal team, to actually, even for off-campus students, we found that students that are off-campus who needed to do same day, a lot of you are in these apartment complexes where your lease is combined with utilities and all of that. So you don't have a separate utility bill, you don't have a bank statement, and your lease can't count as that documentation. So what we have done is tried to work with the state board and the local board to allow you all to go into the banner system, update your permanent address and banner, print that out. We're a state entity as a state university. And so the state board of elections and their legal team approved that document as proof that that's where you live here in Greenville. So even off-campus students can take advantage of that same day registration. And we also, as a university, we participate in something that's known as NSOLVE, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. It's done at a Tufts University out of Boston. And so what that does is it merges publicly available voter data and then merges that with all the data that every university and college sends into what's known as the National Clearinghouse, which is where, like, if you transfer institutions, that's how they know that you've taken courses elsewhere, because every university sends this data in. So what Tufts University does is they merge that data and create these reports. It removes all the personal information about students, but I get a report off of every federal election that shows us what percentage of our students voted, what method did they use. And so we know from this data that most of our students are voting during early voting. And so that's why we worked really hard to have this one-stop early voting site in our main campus student center. Once it opened last January, we really worked hard to move that site from the Willis building to here. Now this year we have Willis and we have Student Center. We have more sites this year than we had previously because of we got additional funding. The county did through the CARES Act because of COVID, trying to make sure that we had, equal access countywide. And so we're rocking like 4th right now in the county out of the 7 sites. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I know definitely a lot of students have taken advantage of one-stop voting, myself included, and even using Banner to show that I do live in a student apartment complex in Greenville. So I know a lot of people are very thankful that North Carolina is one of the places that utilize one-stop voting. But besides one-stop voting, we talked to about the advantages of that. Would either of you mind kind of going into the advantages of using absentee ballots and why states might have policies where they can utilize things like that?
Yeah, sure. So especially because of COVID, and the need to stay away from people, absentee voting has been really beneficial. And we've had some rule changes around absentee voting. And absentee voting we often also call vote by mail, just so that it's the same thing. But because anyone can vote by mail, you don't have to have any kind of special condition to do that. You can just do that. So yeah, it's really beneficial because of COVID. I know there have been some concerns about the slowness of the mail, but if you have requested your ballot early and gone ahead and gotten it and sent it back, you should be in good shape. You can track it. So those some of the benefits are you get to stay home and do it. You can do it on your own schedule. You can track it and make sure that it got where it was supposed to be. And another benefit of it is a law change is that you can drop them off at the early voting sites or at the Board of Elections. So if you do get your ballot, say you just got it in the mail today, and you still can. That does give you still some line avoidance by being able to just take it and drop it off at the Board of Elections or where have you. So It just gives you more flexibility, especially for students. And I'll defer to you, Alice, but students, because of the school, could be anywhere now. And so absentee voting is really a key form of voting for that, for young people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as an institution, we have students from all 50 states. And so, if you're still here and you want to remain registered where you're from, then the absentee process is going to be your best bet. And so, all the things that Marcus said, as far as, making sure that you are following all the directions for completing it, signing in all the right places, making sure, because they do like signature matches when they process these absentee ballots, making sure that you use 2 stamps if you're going to mail it. At this point, I would not trust mailing it at this point. Technically, there was a ruling. The Supreme Court backed away from a ruling yesterday that basically allowed for all the states who have, I think ours is November 12th, Marcus. It has to be received, has to be postmarked by 5 p.m. on election day and received by the Board of Election in North Carolina by the 12th. So that there was a push to stop that and basically put it where they had to have it by 5 p.m. on election day. So states that have that kind of that extension is being allowed to keep that. And so North Carolina, we're in a good spot for that. And I have to say, North Carolina does a wonderful job with elections in general. I mean, compared to some other states that don't have early voting, don't have the no excuse absentee ballot request, that kind of thing. It's I always tell folks there's no excuse not to vote in North Carolina. Definitely not. But those absentees are great for students who are wanting to vote back home, and that's something that students, college students, have that option. You can register here using your address on campus or either at your apartment in Greenville, or you can remain registered or register where your parents are or guardians where you're from. And so making sure that students understand that. Can't vote twice. Don't attempt to do that. Definitely not a good thing. But you have that option as a student.
I'm kind of shifting topics a little bit here. I know one question that I always say to my friends, or my friends say to me when they're trying to figure out who to vote for, it's like, okay, well, just look at their policies. And obviously, that's what you do. But after a candidate gets elected, what can you do personally to make sure that those candidates withhold the policies that they have promised during their campaigning process?
I can't tell you how much I love this question. That's a great question. Because one of the things that we have been telling people, we have been advocating for, is voting plus. So your job is not, as a citizen, is not done once you vote. That would be attuned to a boss or a manager hiring an employee and then failing to supervise. It's just like, gotcha, you're here now, go to that doesn't work out. So yes, in order to make sure that things happen in our democracy, it's incumbent upon us to be active in our democracy. And one of the best ways to do that is to join the organization. So if you talk about having things, policies that you care about that cause you to vote for a certain candidate, well, likely there are organizations that are advocating for that policy that you agree with. And so it would be good to be a part of those organizations if they have any kind of meetings or they have any kind of any way that they are engaging with the public, whether it be email list or whatever. Being a part of that is one good way to help keep the elected officials accountable. Also, they have regular meetings where they will engage with the public. Even people who work in Washington, D.C. periodically have to come and say, hey, this is what I've been doing. And so you can show up at these events and then let people know, hey, this is the issue that I voted for you, or I didn't, or whatever. This is the issue that I care about, or these are my issues. And you can hold them accountable personally. So through organizations where you kind of can combine your power with other like-minded people, that's one big way to do that. Democracy NC is an organization. NAACP, there are a lot of nonprofits that work on whatever your issue, there is someone that's working on it. So help them. And then as an individual, when they come and say, we want feedback from the public, be there to give that feedback. It's a big way. And you can always, do phone calls and that kind of stuff. But those are two big ways: joining the institution and then being there when they come back to make sure that they know who you are and that your voice is heard.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with all of that for sure. and also just not being afraid to, pick up the phone or send an email to your elected representatives. We have tried really hard through like our Citizens Academy called Citizen U of, trying to cultivate, these responsibilities, these values that we hope that all pirates go on to be responsible, engaged citizens. And, when we talk about citizenship, we don't necessarily mean, are you an actual citizen of this country, right? Legally or any of that. It's really just about you're all citizens of the community that you reside in, and you're citizens of Pirate Nation of North Carolina. And so, being a part of that community, and that's really how the civic engagement work fits in with the leadership and the service component of the office that I work in, is how we kind of connect all the dots, right? You learn about your community by serving others. You lead others by learning about, different communities and values and different cultures and diversity. And then hopefully you're going to advocate for the things that you're passionate about. And so part of that is understanding that, at the core of a democracy, the voters and the citizens are the ones that hold the power, and following through and not just, focusing on elections every 4 years. There's also elections that happen every year in North Carolina. There's an election for something. And so getting involved locally. We took a group of Citizen Youth students to Greenville City Hall yesterday, a really small group. We wore our masks, we socially distanced, but we met with the mayor. We got to see the city council chambers. So like showing up at those city council meetings, sending those emails, calling your senators and your representatives. I have their numbers saved in my phone. Like if I'm on the ride home and I'm passionate about something, I'll just call them. It's great. Even if you don't get to talk to someone, leave a message, because there are interns that work in those offices that catalog all of that. We had a constituent from this zip code call about this issue, and this is their stance on it. And those folks create reports that they give to those senators and representatives, say, hey, this is what your constituents are concerned about. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, these politicians, a lot of times they're catering to those who vote. They know who vote because of these voter rolls and who's registered and all of that. So, as a registered voter, you have a lot of power. And so it's important to, remember that and to follow through even after the election, as Marcus said.
I think that's definitely one thing that a lot of people tend to forget. It's not over after you cast your vote. It's leading up to it, and it's a part of their responsibility, to make sure that the people they choose is going to implement those policies that they chose them for, and hopefully make some changes for the better. But additionally, sometimes people don't always agree with the decisions that are made in a democracy. Should everyone still have to stand by those decisions made in the democracy, or why not, if they're a part of the process?
Yeah, I love that question too. So, that's what it means to be. I mean, you really have to, because that's what it means to be part of a democracy. So, we're a big country, we're a diverse country, and we're a big city, we're a big, count. And so not everyone agrees. If you come to my house, it's got 4 people, we ain't all in agreement on all things, right? And so we have to have a process by which decisions will be made. And then once we have made a decision, someone probably is not going to be happy with it, but in order for us to stay together, I'm talking on a household now. In order for us to stay in that household, we gotta kind of live by it. And then, if it doesn't work out, we say, hey, it didn't work out, we'll make adjustments, whatever. But we got to do it as a family. And it's the same thing with a city, a county, a state, and a country. So yeah, we have to abide by them. But that's what the political process is for. You guys are probably too young to remember this Indiana Jones 3, but there's this in Indiana Jones 3, it's young Indiana Jones. You probably don't even know who that is, but anyway, he's trying to fight with this guy. You seen that movie?
I love those movies, of course. Yeah.
So I'm glad someone can connect with. So at the end of it's the opening sequence, and he's trying to save this artifact, and he does it, and the artifact gets taken away from him, and the guy says to him, and I love it. He says, "You lost today, kid, but you don't have to like it." So that's what's up with our democracy. You win some and you lose some, but you don't have to like it. You always live to fight another day. So that's why it's so important that we maintain our democracy. So when we lose our democracy and it's a monarchy or something else, well, then once a decision is made, you can't challenge it, it's over. But in a democracy, there's nothing that's happening that you don't have the power to change. There's no such thing as just the way it is in a democracy, because the people have the power, as Alex has already said. So if you can change enough people's minds, you can change anything in this country. So yeah, when whatever people decide we're going to do, that's what we're going to do right now as a democracy. So if you lose, then hey, let's get to work. Let's change some people. Why don't people understand? Let's get people all agreeing with you, and then guess what? Next election, next time things turn around, you get a chance to win. So nothing's permanent in this democracy, but that's the beauty of it. And so and that's what I say.
I will add to that too, and I'll kind of put on my high school civics U.S. history cap for a second. But I think it's important too to take into context, the glorious thing about our Constitution and our democracy, our republic, is that we have separation of powers. You also have, local, state, and federal, right? And so that breakdown of, where things happen. And you also have, like I said, the separation of powers as far as, when the courts need to get involved on something. And so, you have that other route of, laws may be passed that might be considered unconstitutional. People file suit, and then you've got another branch of government that gets involved, right? And so, sometimes democracy is slow, sometimes it's messy because hearing everyone's voices takes time, but it's important. And sometimes, in this day and age where we want everything immediately, instant gratification, sometimes democracy is a little sluggish, right? But that's okay. As Marcus pointed out, things can change in a democracy very quickly based on, different rulings or votes or elections, that kind of thing. So, it's, and no, not everyone's going to be happy on November 4th or whenever we get the results of this, right? But I think remembering at the end of the day that we're all Americans and we have to move forward together as a nation and as a people is critical.
Yeah, because that's the end result. Not everyone's going to be happy. That's why there's two different sides. So it's kind of inevitable that there's going to be a negative reaction from someone on election night. But it's important, don't stop if you don't like it. Keep going and advocate and try to reform if there needs to be reforming done. So kind of transitioning back to voting a little bit and what's on ballots exactly. Many question, or I seem to run into many people who have this question, kind of the importance of the third party. And they say that given it might have a lesser interest, and a lot ask, is voting for the third party like not voting at all? So when someone asks that question, how would you respond?
That's one of those. So it's not akin to not voting at all. I mean, it's voting. So it counts. And one thing that I want to stress is that we, when it comes to our democracy, be more process oriented and less outcome oriented. In other words, if the process, once you cast your ballot and once you vote, you are letting your voice be heard, and that is victory. What we should be wanting is everyone's voices to be heard, everyone to have a chance to participate, and so that we know what the people want. We really can have an idea what the people want, and then our politics can reflect what the people want. That's the way I view it anyway. So when you vote, then you have won. We hear your voice, whether it's 2 people voting for a party or 2 million. That's what we want. And so democracy wins when you vote. So I will never say that someone's vote doesn't count, because it does. I will say that in this highly polarized environment, when people say like your vote doesn't count and that kind of stuff, what they're getting at is that the way things are currently configured, and it can change, and it may take time to change it. That often there in like the presidential election, because in some states it's different than this, but in North Carolina and in the presidential election, which is what mostly people are talking about, but all elections work like this. One or 2 people are going to win, And so if you're not voting for one of those two, is what they're basically saying, then you're helping that other side win. And so, and that's, but to narrowly answer your question, that vote does count. I do think that what I will say is kind of in harmony with that is that it's very rare. You hear people have critiques of our government saying like, you know, all politicians are the same, and they kind of have this nihilistic viewpoint. And I would say that I don't agree with that. If you get to know any politician that like I have, like on both sides, on all parties, whatever, people are people, and people are different, and so it does matter who's in all. It does matter who you vote for, and so whether it be third party or one of the two main ones, just make sure that your voice is reflected. That's my main concern, and that you're helping to push an agenda that you care about. So if none of those parties care, if you can't choose between the two, I mean, vote for a third party. And I don't stress people for that.
I think that was a wonderful answer. I mean, your vote is important. Your voice is important, regardless of who you vote for. I will say that historically, if we think about it, third party candidates do typically pull votes away from one of the main two parties. I mean, that's just the case. And had they not been on that ballot, then the voters would have, voted for one of the main two. But that doesn't mean that, you wasted your vote in any way. You still expressed your values and your opinion about that particular race. But we do live in a two-party system, which is very different than a lot of European countries. That's a multi-party system, where then they have to build coalitions with one another after the election. And so, but historically, we've seen the main two parties have changed throughout American history, and so who's to say, that a third party today isn't going to replace one of the main two parties down the road? We don't know, right? And so, and I will say this too, sometimes I think people are like, well, I've got to find the person who lines up with everything that I line up. You're not going to find a party or a candidate that lines up with every single thing that you value and you find important. You're not going to agree 100% with them. That's just not going to be the case. And so you've got to figure out what's most important for you and find a party or a candidate that lines up most with the things that are most important for you.
Yeah, because I feel like that's definitely been a factor for people that I've spoken to with, they'll be like, well, I agree with so-and-so, but I don't really like this. So I'm not really sure what to do now and I'm like, well, if they have more positive than negatives in your book, maybe that might be the candidate for you. So that's definitely something to take in consideration.
The answer is not staying home.
Yes. The answer is to vote. Figure it out one way or another. Look at your options, but getting there is what's important. Yeah. Kind of looking at one of a bigger problem with voting in the ballots in America. Ballot roll-off is typically a problem that America faces. Why might a person vote for a president and then fail to vote for lower offices? And what changes could be made to reduce the high level of ballot roll-off that America typically faces?
Oh man, another great question. So people don't really understand the importance. The reason why people don't vote in midterms or off-year, non-presidential, they don't understand. In general, people don't understand the true power that the Congress has. I mean, Congress is the most powerful body that the government had. Now, it's been weakening over the years. It's been doing it itself, but it's still, that's where all the power is. But people don't understand that. I often like to say, if you vote for a president, but that president doesn't have a Congress that works with them, I won't even get partisan, just say that will work with them. The president is almost powerless without a Congress that is working with her. Again, the president does have a lot of power, especially overseas, and to administer the laws and that kind of thing. So the president is pretty powerful, but if you don't have a president working with a Congress, then that's going to limit a lot of what can be done. And people don't understand that. And so they have a president, and, you know, and they think that that's that person is going to do it. So they don't. And then too, I would say the media feeds into that. The media does not, you know, there isn't as much media attention around lower, you know, congressional races, judges, all the state races, none of those things. There are a lot of people who don't know who the governor is in the state. Now, when you look at COVID, you see like different states have, you know, been managed totally differently based upon the competency or whatever, or however you want to put it, of the governor, or the way the governor responds to COVID. And so now you're kind of seeing, hey, these people have a lot of power, but people a lot of times don't even know who they are. So again, it's just because I think our media has been kind of nationalized. You know, it's really easy to have, you know, a leader. You think about a leader, and that's the president, and people don't really understand the power of Congress. And that, so what we can do to change that is and that's my word, is to do more civil education. I guess you too, to really help people to appreciate where the true power lies. That they have, number one, you as a citizen, as a person, have power. The people have power. We give our power to the government, and the government organization, the government, the branch of the government that we're most directly in contact with is the Congress, is the House, basically the House of Representatives. So like, that's your number one person, and a lot of times people don't even think about that. So we just have to educate one another, and I think these years where politics has become very front and center in all of our minds. There was a time where people would just vote and then really forget about politics for 4 years, and then but we see more and more that the way things are going in this media environment, we don't do that as much. So I think we're all getting an education about the power of Congress and about the power of governors and other people, and I think that's going to help us in further races to have more participation. In 2018, last thing I'll say is we had there was a lot of turnout in 20. I think I was just looking at that. It was one of the bigger midterm elections that we've had as a country, and so I think the trend is going up, that people are more concerned with the power of Congress, and I think that's good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Marcus said as far as, you know, the perceived power of the president is just tremendous, right, in our nation. And so we discredit the other branches tremendously. We discredit state and local governments and how much power and what they do for us on a daily basis. I talk about this in Citizen U all the time of, you know, especially like yesterday when we visited City Hall, like, you know, every time you flip on the light switch and you trust that you're going to have electricity, that's Greenville Utilities. That's not the federal government. Every time that you know, turn on the water and you trust that the water is safe to drink, that's Greenville Utilities. That might not mean a whole lot to you, but if you're from Flint, Michigan, it probably means a whole lot to you, you know, because the water there isn't safe to drink, you know. And I think another thing too that contributes to this is the lack of information about local candidates, and how to access that information plays into it as well. I know that the School of Communications here, we just added a link to our election website where they've done a wonderful job of compiling information, nonpartisan information about local candidates to Eastern North Carolina who are running and are on the ballot. And that's another thing that I hear from students all the time is like, I can't find out anything about, you know, these lower, you know, races on the ballot. And so there's a lot of great national resources, Ballotpedia, Ballot Ready. Those are great too, big ones. But still, when you get to local stuff, it makes it even harder to find information. But, you know, sometimes you got to dig a little bit. And, you know, the East Carolinian did a voter guide for us in 2018 for local races. So, you know, relying on your local newspapers, your local press to help with that. A lot of them are doing town halls and stuff on Facebook Live and things like that, debates and stuff, even with local races. But, you know, I think, you know, realizing just how, you know, how much power is. And I think, you know, like Marcus said, the COVID playing into, you know, just showing how much is decided local and state, I think has opened some people's eyes to just how much power resides at the state and local level for sure.
Yeah, I think it was I think I can agree. That was definitely a big, I wouldn't say, well, I guess I could say shock factor to a lot of people on how many decisions are made by our governor versus President of the United States, specifically for our communities. Because I know there's been a lot of people going back and forth on some of those decisions. So, but speaking of COVID, there was a question in the chat that I missed a few minutes ago from one of our attendees, which is, how are COVID-19 social distancing guidelines being managed with such high early voting turnout rates? And do you expect that it will impact wait times on election day?
So that's a great question. It is going to impact elections, I think. Well, the fact that so many people voted early, I think it's going to help. But yeah, I think it's going to have a big impact. And the reason why we have 7 sites instead of our traditional 6, one of the reasons is because, as I was mentioned, because they were trying to spread out the sites because of COVID. As a matter of fact, usually, and some of the sites that we have now were chosen because they were bigger and they would allow more people to be in there and be socially distant. So, so for example, we have a site at the Epps Center now, where that would traditionally have been at the 1717 West Fifth Street, where the actual Board of Election, or close to that, in that building, but they thought it was too cramped, and so they wanted to have more space. So those are some of the things that they've been doing to manage turnout, to make sure people are 6 feet apart. You know, they have to make sure that only very few people are in the room at the same time. So they are taking all these steps, and that is causing the line to be a little bit longer than normal, but it's also a function of just how turnout. So those are some of the ways that they're managing it, and I'm curious what else you would want to add.
Yeah, so I know a little bit about that just from helping with the planning of this polling site here in the Student Center, and so they've worked incredibly hard to make sure that it is as safe as possible, as far as making sure that all of the little pop-up areas where you fill out your ballot is social distanced. There's even spots in the line. We set up a queue inside, for the line, trying to make sure that those are distanced. Getting the pin instead of the sticker, so everyone has a clean pin, is really a wonderful thing too. And all of the poll workers are wearing masks and protection, and the plastic barriers and stuff like that. But again, that's what's wonderful about North Carolina with the no excuse absentee ballot. If you don't feel comfortable going, you don't have to. You've had the option to request this absentee ballot. I don't know exactly what election day is going to look like. I think there's been so many people that have voted already. So I don't know what lines will look like on election day, but turnout nationwide for this election is, I think, going to be some of the highest that we've seen in a generation, probably, at least.
Speaking, kind of going off of that into our next question, which navigates perfectly. Since in 2020, we have seen one of the largest voting turnouts for the younger demographic. How do you both believe this will affect the polls, and what kind of difference was there between this election and last election to kind of spike this increase of youth voting turnout?
I'm gonna defer a lot to you on this. The only thing I would say is, so I don't know how it's gonna. I know statistically they say young people vote a certain way. I want to be very careful not to make claims. Because those are kind of broad generalities. They're not wrong to make, but I just want to stay away from myself. But so I don't know how it will affect the actual election, the outcome of the election, but I would suspect the reason why you see young people voting in higher numbers is, well, one reason is because recent events have kind of galvanized, with social media and just a lot of the issues that you've seen, like, recently we had a young person led march like all over the country. And a lot of those people, they were doing stuff like registering people to vote at those events. And people that were maybe young that was a few years ago, have come of age. I saw a Facebook post that say, all of these people now can vote that, that couldn't before. So, so those, right now, this politics is what is in a lot of people's mind. I mean, it's something that we see every day. And so young people especially have points of view about it. And so that might be why we see such high turnout, higher turnout during this election. But I'm really curious to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think, there's a combination of factors at play here. I think you got overall turnout is just higher, right? So just people are talking about it more. And so that's going to trickle down regardless of age. I think you're also you saw this work beginning to be institutionalized on college campuses about 5 or 6 years ago. And so, you're really starting to see folks like me who are doing this work in a nonpartisan fashion on a college campus where it hadn't been done before, or it was a faculty member or a grad assistant. And it really takes someone who is written into their job description like it is mine, that is consistent, that's here, that's providing resources, got programs going on, advocating for students, that kind of thing. But I think I think Marcus hit something on the head with the idea of, you all were a generation that were impacted by school shootings, climate change issues, all of these really pressing, issues with your future and where we're headed that I think are just lighting a fire under, a lot of people, especially young people. Plus, you've got social media and technology at your fingertips that are constantly reminding you of registration and voting and the power that you have. So I think it's a combination of things. But regardless of what's causing it, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and just personally speaking, as someone who is in the generation of youth voting, I definitely agree with what both of you said. I think we've experienced a lot in the last few years, and leading up to this election was really a time for us to make some of the reform that needed to be happen in a lot of those departments and regulations and things like that. So I definitely agree. Okay, other than voting, what are some kind of the ways that people can participate in the political process? Which ones are kind of electoral and which ones are not? And what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of these kind of activities besides voting to be involved in the political process?
Well, I mean, you can always run for office. And I would love to see more young people doing that. But besides from voting, like running for office, you can serve on a committee or, so there are a lot of things that a lot of bodies that make decisions in our government that people don't know about. So, for example, I mentioned the Board of Elections, which is a 5-person board, and you're appointed to that board by, political parties. But there's no reason why a person, I guess, over 18 couldn't be on a board like that. So so those are some ways you can do it. Now you can also help candidates, phone banking, canvassing. These are things, working. There are a lot of things that poll work politicians get people on their campaigns to do. And then we spoke before about, advocacy as far as, working with organizations, advocating for them. You can donate money to groups. I mean, that's a form of helping that's outside of voting that is very powerful. And like I said, volunteering for organizations. So there are a lot of things you can do you can write letters, write op-eds, there are things, and always, I mean, never forget the importance of word of mouth and talking to your friends about things. People vote, as much as we like to think that, people have this high and mighty type, I care about this issue, thus I shall vote, I mean, that's true. But a lot of times people are voting because of their social environment. They vote socially because their peers vote, and they feel like that's just what it's almost like something that people do. And so when you tell your friends that you vote, then they're more likely to vote. Say, hey, let's go to the polls together. Then they're more likely to do. So you can, and again, now I'm talking about voting, but anything that you do like that, it affects. There are ways you can issues and affect our politics just by being, just by talking about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. People, if you ask them, have you voted? People don't want to say no. There's a little bit of shame that goes with that, right? Like that's your kind of the bare minimum, of being a responsible, engaged citizen in our nation, is that you participate in elections. But as a student, you can get involved with a student organization. There are college repubs, college Dems, Turning Point USA, NAACP, Young Democratic Socialists. We have all of those here at ECU, and so you can join those organizations and get involved. And typically, they work with the larger organization too. So, like college Dems work with Pitt County Democratic Party, and so that's just one example of how you can get involved with that. You can work at a polling site. You can show up at Board of Elections meetings. You can go to city council meetings. The city has they have like 16 different commissions, and these are open to the citizens to serve on. And so there's a commission for like Parks and Rec. There's a Human Relations Council commission. All these different, whatever your interest might be, you can share your talents and share your gifts with, and they serve as kind of advisory councils for the larger city council about issues. And so that's another way that you can get involved. But run for office is a wonderful idea too. I mean, we've had several ECU graduates. I mean, our current mayor of Greenville was the ECU graduate. He's not from here. He's from Wisconsin. He came here to play baseball. Like he fell in love with the Eastern North Carolina gal. He's still here. Now he's our mayor, right? We have Will Bell, city council member, ECU graduate. Like, that we have kind of a history of like young people graduating, like staying around and like running for local office. And that's really awesome. You can get involved with SGA. That's another great thing here on campus. You can get involved with that. I know Marcus talked about donating money. I know a lot of you probably don't have a lot of that right now. But your time and volunteering is another wonderful thing that you can do. And if you decide to choose a political party to align yourself with, you can get involved with that party. I've had some friends and some former students who have ended up serving as like electors for the party when they go to their conventions and stuff. So lots of different ways you can get involved. But don't sit on the sidelines, that's for sure, because you all have talents.
I think, again, agree with both of what you said about just being involved and generally in as many ways you can, whether it not be, necessarily donating money if you don't have that resource, looking for other ways to volunteer, join organizations, join clubs, to really work towards being educated as well when making those kind of decisions. So
yeah, stay up to date with the news, what's going on, not just nationally, but in your communities too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, kind of wrapping up here a little bit. I know that was probably one of the better questions to end up. I know we're coming on the 1 hour mark. We did allow kind of another extra 30 minutes in case more attendees wanted to ask any questions. I will open the floor now to attendees if anybody wanted to make a comment, ask a question about the process, or anybody had any questions about what we have gone over today.
I would ask our panelists what advice they have for you guys as journalists in covering politics in general, and perhaps how who's in office affects local issues, ECU issues, and any advice for you guys, for the students here, on the kinds of things to be looking for, concentrating on, that kind of thing.
Wow, that's a great question. So this one won't be this was my very first thought. Was I'm curious about this idea of objectivity in media now. Like I feel like there's a school of thought that is coming up that that it's hard to be objective, so you might as well just be not No, just So I guess my first thought was like, I appreciate knowing the priors that people have when they're presenting an argument. So like, and I guess in journalism you can't do this, but later on in careers where you're doing more, editorial type writing, I always like it when people tell me what point of view they're saying what they're saying from, so that I, as the reader, can take that into account. Because we all have points of view, we all have a set of assumptions that we just show up with, which is just our past experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. We can't get around it. So I just like to know what that is, so that I know that when you look at this situation, you're looking at it from a particular lens. And I want to see it from that lens. I mean, I don't find that colors it at all. I mean, if it's presented with. So that's one thing I would love to see more of in journalism and politics writ large, as people just being honest about what they think and what they feel. I think a lot of times what we get from the media are disingenuous arguments, where people and bad faith arguments, where people have agenda A, but they don't want to say that. So then they'll say, everything but that, and they'll say arguments that kind of lead you toward A, but they won't say that. So for example, if you are, if you want to abolish the color green, I'll just make up something, right? But you might not say, let's abolish the color green in public spaces, but you will say stuff like, studies show that some people get sick when they see green of a certain hue. Like, what are you trying to do, man? And we really want to protect the public from, this potential health threat. No, you really don't like the color green. You don't want to see it. Like, if you could just say that and say why you really don't like it, maybe we would agree with you. So I would love for our media to truth seek more, and not just take what's handed to it as on face value, because we've just seen a lot of people are very adept at not saying what they really mean, and just saying everything and kind of fooling the public. And so it's hard for the public to really know what the choices are and what the trade-offs are, whatever, when everyone's being disingenuous. So like, can we get the truth, please? What do you really want? And so, and I would love for journalism to be more focused on that. Like, what do people really think and feel, and make them say it. And maybe people would agree, but I just really want to know the truth. That's my thought.
One of my favorite quotes is democracy dies in darkness. And so you all have such a powerful and important position in our democracy, is to, uncover what's going on, right? If we think about, Nixon and Watergate and the power of those journalists, of Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, and since then, the power of the press and the media of showing the American public about what's going on. But I think what's happened, since 24-hour news in the 90s and cable news, is the confusion of the American public between someone from the media who's just sharing the news, and then a pundit, right? And so pundits are there to share their opinion about things, and there's a time and a place for that, right? We've had op-eds, for a long time, and opinion pieces, but when someone cuts on the cable news network and thinking that they're hearing, the truth, or that kind of thing, is something that, we go back way back in the day where you just had ABC, CBS, and NBC, and you cut it on, and that was, everyone had that baseline of truth, right? And today it's just where's the truth, right? And so it makes me think about, just the importance of being literate when it comes to media, and the importance of that. And when you're writing about the facts and sharing the facts, like, make sure you tell people, like, these are just the facts. This isn't my opinion, right? And when you are sharing your opinion, then say, this is my opinion. And I think that will help moving forward. But, social media and the siloing that has happened, with all of that, is it's something that the media and the press is not going to be able to fix on their own. It's something we're going to have to tackle as a nation, as far as, how do we find that baseline of truth, so that we can all work from there, and understand what's opinion and what's fact.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely, like you said, it's not just going to be one party in that situation alone working towards, making sure you're reaching out to a credible news source when you're getting your facts, or, is this journalism really here? Are this journalist really here to tell me the truth? I think there's a lot of actions and methods that both parties can take to kind of prove that forward. That being said, I know a lot of us here have probably experienced stuff like that, since we have some of our reporters in attendance. I know you guys have covered a lot of different campaigns and things like that of different political parties that have come to Greenville, and even myself, will post it on social media. Like you said, Alex, that's a good gateway for people seeing this kind of coverage. And one day I'll post Trump being covered, and the next day I'll post, Biden or Kamala or someone being covered, and they'll be like, wait a minute, I thought you just posted that. Why are you posting this? And I'm like, well, I wasn't choosing a side. I was just telling you what happened. So I definitely agree with that. But thank you, Cherie, for asking that question. Does anybody else have any more questions or comments they would like to add to the discussion? All right. Well, I think that is all that I have for both of you today, Marcus and Alex. Thank you again so much for joining us. Really appreciated the discussion. I think there was a lot of good things said. And thank you for everyone for coming out. And I go ahead and wrap up everything here, unless either of you want to add a few more words about anything or share some resources.
We do plan to put the video up on the Pirate Media One website. So if everyone will share it when it gets there, and also just encourage people to go look at it so that everyone can be privy to the information that was shared here, that would be great.
I just dropped a link in the chat if you need some resources around the election. That's our ECU United Elections Nonpartisan 2020 website. So if you need anything with that, there's a new tab under Vote 2020 that says post-election and then faculty resources. Regardless of the outcome next week, we're going to need to provide some, resources and some programming for our community and our campus to move forward post-election. So that's kind of the next step, right? After the election is coming back together. So, but make sure everyone votes. It's super important. It's your voice. So here to help if anybody has any questions or needs anything.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much again, everybody. And hopefully everyone will tune in for our next Tech Talk next semester, which you should hopefully hear about soon, and hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Bye, everyone.